The next session here is going to be a slight change for that I think that currently appears, but I think that we're all going to really enjoy this discussion. I think we'll change the title to Unplugged and Unafraid with Mr. Charlie Sykes. It's my pleasure to welcome him onto the stage. I really don't think he needs any introduction, but this should be a great conversation. So Charlie, if you want to take a seat, we'll... All right, Mr. Charlie Sykes in the flesh. What an honor to have you here.
It's good to be out of the basement.
Out of the basement, good. I think this may be your third. You've been here with us from the very beginning. I mean, you've been sort of in the trenches with us. Obviously, everyone in this room has listened to your podcast, read your writings. I'm just curious from your perspective as someone who has been in the business for years and has seen sort of the ebbs and flows. From the media's perspective, 2024 election, they've covered Donald Trump once. They know the drill to some extent. Is the media going to cover Donald Trump in 2024 the right way? Are they going to get it right?
Fuck no. Thank you. And that's it. First of all, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. I mean, it is always great to be in a room of people who are also not crazy. This is worth the price of admission for all of you. But no, the media is not going to get 2024 right, and we've already seen evidence of this. Donald Trump has broken the model of American journalism, and American journalism has not recovered. And just to give you an example I actually brought notes because I thought you might ask that question. I want you to think about some news stories over the last couple of months, okay? Donald Trump called for the death penalty for General Mark Milley. He mocked the hammer attack on the 80-plus-year-old husband of Nancy Pelosi. He's called repeatedly for the summary execution of shoplifters. He has endorsed extrajudicial murders. He asked Vladimir Putin, just a few days after Vladimir Putin launched his genocidal war against Ukraine, he asked Vladimir Putin for help in smearing Joe Biden. Now, could I just stop right here? These stories on Earth 2.0 would have dominated the year's headlines. This would have been disqualifying moments. They would have been wall-to-wall coverage. And yet, as I go through them, you might go, yeah, I kind of forgot about that one. Because the news media, again, I think if you ask them, this is not normal, you know that, right? And yet we still pretend that it's normal. Or we pretend that it's reasonably within the range of normal politics. And as you watch the political coverage, you can actually, if you blink, think, yeah, it's 1996 all over again, or it's 1984, when in fact, we are seeing this amazing transformation of American politics. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but we are not sufficiently alarmed by this. And the media, and again, I don't want you to be despondent. I want alarmed but not despondent about all of this, but to understand exactly what we are up against. And every time you hear the horse race stuff, you hear the polls, you see the focus groups and everything, it's like, yeah, this is like we have a primary election and here's election night, as if somehow we have not broken something fundamental. So I only got about halfway through my list. I mean, Donald Trump, just we remind ourselves, he incited an attempt to overthrow the government. And that's like number 3 on the list, right? He, as the previous panel mentioned, he has openly called for terminating elements of the Constitution to restore him to power. Just take that story. How many front pages were devoted to that for a week? Look, I think the questions about Joe Biden's age are legitimate. I wanted to say that. But if Joe Biden stumbled coming off Air Force One, it would receive more coverage than any single one of these stories. And I think that is part of the problem. So in the last week, Donald Trump basically said that he would abandon our NATO allies and invited Vladimir Putin to invade Europe if people didn't pay their NATO dues, which of course doesn't actually exist. After the murder of Alexei Navalny shocked the conscience of the world, Donald Trump was unable to come up with any comment because he was too busy hawking golden tennis shoes, and then compared himself to Alexei Navalny, which is obscene. The problem is that we have this banality of crazy. This is a phrase from Brian Klaas, is that there's so much bullshit. There are so many moments that would be disqualifying. When he was campaigning against Nikki Haley and he was mocking, where's Nikki's husband? Where's Nikki's husband? Well, he was doing what you were too fucking afraid to do, which was put on a uniform and go out and defend the country. Was that a like page 14 story or anything? So we keep going through all of this. He has made it very clear that if he's elected president, he will pardon the rioters who attacked the Capitol, who beat up police officers. Now, again, I know I use the phrase too much. I'm old enough to remember when the Republicans claimed to be the party of law and order, when they claimed to back the blue. And here he is saying, I am going to stand in solidarity with people who literally beat up police officers. How is that not a consuming news story? How every day do we go without having Republicans in Congress shown a picture of somebody saying, would you support pardoning this person? Do you think this is a genuine American hero? And I haven't even gotten to the fact that he paid off a porn star or that a federal jury and judge said that he raped a woman. Somebody asked earlier today, I think it was, you asked Fiona Hill address this, does Vladimir Putin have, compromat on Donald Trump? What more could you have than Stormy Daniels and E. Jean Carroll? And the Republican Party says, yeah, we are okay with that. So the question was, is the media going to get 2024 right? No, they're going to continue to go, hey, maybe we could have a town hall meeting with Donald Trump. This will be a ratings get for us to do. We will cover both sides as if it is, a reasonable moment in American politics. And again, I don't know what the right answer is. I want to make it very clear, except that, that you have to call lies lies. You have to not turn your platform over to someone like this. And you can't pretend that what's going to happen in my hometown in Milwaukee this summer is like a normal political convention when the cult gathers to anoint Donald Trump. So, I'm sorry, that was a somewhat long answer, but...
You covered a lot of ground.
Okay.
A lot of good ground.
Well, I gave you the short answer.
That was the short one? Okay, good. So a lot of things to jump in on there. One that I'm particularly interested in when I hear you talk about the responsibility of sort of what I hear you talking about is really the legacy sort of mainstream outlets. I think a big problem is this siloization of the way that we consume news. So many Americans aren't even watching these networks to some degree. And to a lot of degrees, some don't even watch them at all. They're watching Newsmax, or they're watching Tucker Carlson on Twitter, or Andrew Tate on YouTube talk about God knows what. How has that happened? You kind of been in conservative media ecosystems back when it was normal. Right. Is that a problem we can fix? Is it addressable, and is it just going to continue to get worse?
I think it is likely to get worse before it gets better. When I wrote my book about how the right lost its mind in 2017, I was pessimistic, but it was way worse than I thought. Because this siloization has accelerated all of the incentive structures in the media are to silo people off, to create safe spaces so that people don't talk to one another. I don't see that changing anytime soon. In fact, if you understand what the business model now of the right-wing ecosystem is, it's, imagine, some meth dealers on the street, and they're in competition with one another, and the only way that you stay ahead is by selling stronger meth than the guy on the next block. And so you have to keep, ramping up the outrage, keep ramping up the hippie punching, et cetera. And if you back off from that, you run the risk of losing your audience. So what we are seeing is the audience capture. I know that there are people who think, well, if we just did this to Fox News or just did this to this, it's not always top down. Sometimes it is. But a lot of it's bottom up. It's like, these are my people, I have to follow them. The heart wants what it wants. And they're captured by the audience, which is demanding the harder and harder and harder stuff. Now, the really bad news, I'm afraid, is that if you step back from what's happening right now, and I want to talk about the crazy pill thing, if you step back, because we've spent the last 8 years going, why is this happening? Why do people believe this sort of stuff? When's it going to go back to normal? It's not going back to normal. In fact, what's happening now ought to remind us what happens in a society where people become isolated, alienated from one another, bored, when all the mediating institutions of society fall away and we're all spend these times in these silos. And the silos, to your point, understand that all the outrages that I just mentioned about Donald Trump, there may be 40% of the country that doesn't know any of it, that will never hear of it. And unless there are ads on the Hallmark Channel or something that tells them this, which is not a terrible idea, by the way. So I think that this atomization is going to continue, and I think that it becomes more and more difficult. I told the story, I think I've told you the story, how, as a conservative talk show host, I always assumed that people got both sides of the story, we were the other side of the story. And by 2016, it was pretty obvious you could not push back against disinformation or fake news, because if it was outside the silo, people didn't want to hear it. And those of you who have relatives, who have family members, or in your community, you know how hard it is. You have a piece of fake information. How do you refute it? Well, the answer is it's irrefutable, because as a result, we are going through a period of real tectonic change. I don't want to compare what we're going through now to, say, the Black Death, or to World War I, or the Depression, but the reality is the world has changed. The world has changed globally. We're not alone. There have been dislocations that are taking place across the world. The pandemic changed a lot of things. To anyone here that imagines that we're going to go back to the politics of the before times, I think maybe that's why we're all so shocked all the time, because we think we understand America is like this, politics is like this. If A happens, then B will happen. So we go, what, are we the crazy ones that it's not happening? But the problem is that world doesn't exist anymore for millions of Americans. And we're going to have to get used to this. This is not going to be something that's going to be resolved in 2024.
So, optimistic discussion. I'm just tracing forward that arc that you're sketching, because I agree with it. I don't think it's reversible. I don't think we're going to wake up and everybody's going to get their coffees and start watching Meet the Press in the morning, and we're going to have nice Monday morning conversations about the debate. I'm just curious what the people in this room, what citizens as consumers of news and information, and citizens that, like you say, they coach their kids' t-ball teams with these people who are getting a completely different narrative about the world that we're living in. How do you break that cycle? Because at the end of the day, we can't address siloization with more siloization.
Right.
I don't know the answer, and I ask it a lot. I'm curious if you have thoughts on what people in this room can do to address that problem.
Well, you're right. It's that point. You cannot fight siloization with more siloization. And I know that there are some people who believe that the response to all of this is for those of us that look at Donald Trump, see what Donald Trump is doing, watch this mad rush toward extremism and radicalism, and say, the only way to fight this is that we all need to become liberal Democrats now, okay? We need to fight the tribalism by all emphasizing our tribal loyalties to the other side. I understand this argument. It's dangerous because this country needs two rational political parties. So from my point of view, this is my point of view, the most important people in American politics are the people in this room right now, the people who are center-rights in the center, the people like Liz Cheney, people like Adam Kinzinger, people like Mitt Romney, people like Larry Hogan, those people who have said, look, we are still Republicans, but we're not crazy, we're not authoritarians. We signed up for a libertarian party, not a fascist party, because those are the people who can still speak to the people who will determine the election, which are the swing voters, maybe 500,000 voters in 7 states in Wisconsin. And so those people are conservatives or have voted Republican, may vote for Republicans up and down the ticket, despite what I may tell them to do, but will say, Donald Trump is a bridge too far. He's not normal. He is an existential threat to American democracy, and we're going to bail. If we decide basically like, no, really, we like all the policies of the liberal left, and we are not concerned about the attacks on liberalism coming from the left. Look, I mean, the distinction that I've made, and I borrowed it from others, is that there is an attack from the left, an illiberal attack from the left, and then there's the illiberalism of the right. The illiberalism of the left is like long-term cancer. The illiberalism of the right now is like a heart attack, immediate. And right now you call 911, you call the paramedics, we need to unite to deal with that, but don't pretend that there are not other problems. Don't cut yourself off, silo yourself off from millions of Americans who are fundamentally decent people. And you ask the question, how do you do it? Well, you show up. You go to Little League, you go to T-ball, you go to soccer, and you know what you notice about the people who are standing around? They're not crazy. They may be on some weird Facebook page. But this is the thing, and I will admit this is the thing that makes me take the crazy pills. These are people who would never tolerate this kind of behavior from their children's coaches, from their babysitters, from a coworker. They teach sportsmanship, they teach decency, they want their children to treat one another with respect, they believe in the truth, and yet somehow when it comes to who they want to put in the presidency, they're willing to set all that aside. So to the extent there's some optimism is there's this vestige of fundamental decency that if you get them away from, the way I would do it is, don't start by talking about Donald Trump. Start showing that you share their values, that you understand them, that you don't hold them in contempt. And then once they realize that you are like them and that you care about the things they care about, then you can move to the others. If you start at the top line, you know how it goes. You've all had that conversation, right?
You start at the principles. Maybe.
Yep. Exactly.
I want to kind of switch gears a bit. I think in one of the other panels they talked about Mike Gallagher resigning recently, making that decision. Obviously, Paul Ryan had stepped down before him. Good, principled conservatives that basically just said, I'm out of here, I'm checking out, I'm done, I don't want to put up with this. I'm curious, is there hope in Wisconsin? I mean, you're still out there. I mean, do you think those guys will be back? Should we expect them back? Or do you think that, they've just kind of accepted the state of the party?
Paul Ryan's never coming back, so no. And I think in some ways that's unfortunate because he represented an alternative direction for the Republican Party. I know that there are some people who believe that Donald Trump is just the logical extension of where every Republican was going. And I'm telling you, I don't think that's true. By the way, one of the things I've been doing lately is I've been walking my dogs a lot more often lately. Is I actually got a couple of Audible books listening to all the collected columns of, say, a Charles Krauthammer, a principled conservative. It's impossible to sort of go back into that before time and listen to minds like that and think, yeah, this is going to lead to Trumpism. You know, the thought, the nuance, the intelligence, the understanding of history, the appreciation for the American values, the specific American values of the rule of law. But to your question, the story about Mike Gallagher, you're all familiar with this, I assume, you know, young, bright congressman from Wisconsin, was really one of the rising stars, had to make compromises with MAGA, disappointed, as they all are. But, you know, in the last 2 weeks, he said, yeah, I'm not running for re-election, I'm leaving. So I think there's a larger pattern here in terms of the wave. You know, I mean, what happens with waves? Well, waves always break sooner or later, right? Something that can't be sustained forever doesn't last forever. The Republican Party is in the process of eating its young, its intelligent young. Think about what the bench is going to look like for the Republican Party. Because if you are a really bright young guy like a Mike Gallagher, or fill in the blanks, look at the list of the people who've retired recently. These are people who say, I don't want to be part of this anymore. You know, I'd like being a congressman, but not if it means I have to sit in the same room with Lauren Boebert for another 2 years, you know, or Matt Gaetz or Paul Gosar. Just this shit is just not worth it anymore. So they are leaving. And if you're a young Republican and you want to get into public life, the next generation, what do you have to do right now? Think of the crap sandwiches you have to swallow. Think of the rings you have to kiss. Think of the litmus tests you have to pass. And how many of these bright young Republican men and women are saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something else with my life. I'm not going in. So let's look 20, 30 years from now, 10, 20 years from now. What is the bench of the Republican Party going to be looking like? What is the younger generation going to look like? Because right now, Donald Trump is dominant in the Republican Party. MAGA is in complete triumph. But the price is, think about all the people who are self-deporting, self-selecting themselves out of that political party. And I think that will have consequences for a very, very long time.
We got a couple minutes left, and I want to offer maybe a counter narrative of maybe the next 4 to 6 years. Suppose, you know, I'm of the view that Trump's grip on the Republican Party is not really rooted in any sort of policy agenda. You know, he hasn't convinced everyone to abandon their ideas. It's not really an idea thing. It is the cult of his personality, the fact that there aren't very many strong leaders to go up against him in the party. He railroaded all those people out. And so he's like this big, charismatic, yeah, I mean, I'll say it, he's charismatic. Agree with him or not, he's got some charisma and personality that, you know, resonates with the voters.
I really don't get that, but
yeah.
go on.
I just, but it's enough. It's enough to capture the voters.
Yeah.
It's enough to capture the voters. So it's like a big hot sun in the middle of a MAGA solar system that keeps all the planets revolving. And I think one counter narrative could be that when that sun is gone, when you take that sun out of the solar system, it's going to be a shit show. You know, it's going to be crazy. Yeah. I mean, you're going to have Marjorie Taylor Greene, Vivek, who knows what he's doing. It's going to be just a chaos. And I'm just curious, in that moment when there's no leader, there's no person that can fill those crazy shoes that he has created, I mean, where does the party go? I don't think it goes back to Reagan. No. If you're in that narrative, what does a conservative movement after Trump look like if one could ever possibly exist?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because that will be a hell of a moment when he leaves. It's not going to be a snapback, but it's going to be what I think some theorists call the plastic moment in history, where you have these hinge points where everything is in play, and in a short period of time you could have really, really, really dramatic choices. So, you know, from the highest level, I would say, look, this is going to be a MAGA-like party for a long time, but one caveat today. So it is Saturday. Nikki Haley is going to go down to defeat in South Carolina. And of course, the usual pundits are going to say, see, there's no room for anyone like that in the Republican Party. But I would say that the debate that is taking place right now over the future of Ukraine is going to be one of those decisive debates. Republicans have shown a willingness to cave in on virtually everything else, and they may cave in on this. I'm not naive about that. But right now, the more traditional conservative Republican internationalist point of view, it's an endangered species, but it's not extinct yet. If there was a vote in the House of Representatives, if the fifth string speaker, Mike Johnson, would, when he comes back from vacation, find a paragraph in Deuteronomy that tells him that he can have a vote, the vote would be overwhelming. I think there'd be 300 votes, bipartisan votes, for the aid to Ukraine. You saw that there were 70 votes, bipartisan votes, in the Senate. So there is still a very live issue. And so I do think there's a possibility that on some of those wedge issues, there is hope that you're going to push back against Trump. And that's why I think this debate about Ukraine is going to be so serious. But also, try to think ahead. What happens? What is the next step going to happen? Because the story of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is not going to get any better. It's not going to improve. The election cycle is not going to make things calmer. And so part of the difficulty of making these predictions that you're talking about is we don't know the level of chaos that's still coming. I'm always glad to see Harry Dunn up here, but every time I see Harry Dunn, the police officer who saved the Capitol, was one of the genuine heroes of January 6th. I'm sorry, but I think January 6th was a dress rehearsal. Does anyone in this room think that Donald Trump will graciously concede defeat in 2024? Does anyone? What do you think the aftermath of the 2024 election is going to be like? It's not going to be like anything. So we were shocked after 2020. Should we be shocked after 2024? Is the media, to your question, preparing people for that? Might there be another assault on the Capitol? Might there be other outbreaks of political violence? That's a wedge issue in the future. That right now, Donald Trump can provide cover for every sort of dishonesty, every sort of immorality, every sort of incident of wink wink to domestic terrorism. I'm not sure that will survive him. So I think that there is, if you believe, and again, none of what I'm saying is ideological. It's not right versus left. If there's a fundamental decency, a sense of fairness, a sense of right and wrong, I think as you watch the international stage play out, but also what might happen domestically, I think that there might be a pivot moment coming.
Mr. Charlie Sykes, thank you very much.
Thank you.